you would be completely out of place if you lived like a Sierra Leonean in America. And in some ways that maybe it wouldn't even be good as far as work goes, because it doesn't really make sense in our cultural context. Now, on the other side, how do we, like there's a glorification of productive work in the States, and it's really hard not to fall into it, and it's really hard to resist.
Hello and welcome to Why Are We Talking About Rabbits? Again, brought to you from our new studio. That's right. If you can't see it, you can't see our neon sign that says Mr. Who You ? That's right. To find out more about that, you're going to have to listen to the podcast. But that is a quote directly from Sierra Leone in West Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, today I bring you Austin Klise. That's right. Austin Klise, a field worker from Sierra Leone, returns to talk about something called re-immersion. Immersion again, to be membered again in America. What's it like? What's he learned? What kind of man has he become? And actually, there's some really interesting stuff in here about dough, about cash, about money. That's right. Austin Klise, returned Peace Corps volunteer, philosopher, businessman, and just all around cool guy about to get married. A First Things Foundation special on Why Are We Talking About Rabbits? Austin Klise, welcome. Look at you. How you been?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Guys, this is Austin, field worker for First Things, basically a year and a half. Then pandemic came back and worked in Appalachia. You were in Sierra Leone.
That's right. Kailon, Sierra Leone.
Now we're going to talk about re-immersion or resurrection, how it goes when you come back to life in America and how you've been doing. But before we do, I want to point something out to everybody. If you listen on Apple or whatever, that's cool. But you really got to check out the new studio. That's painting. Like this is intentional, Austin. Do you see the colors?
I do. Yeah, it's cool. So what is that? Is that a green screen? What is behind you?
No, we created a studio, and that is painted on the wall.
Amazing. That's at your house?
Yeah, that's at our house. And you can see that you can write on the wall with this paint, and you can see your name there. I gotta work on that, but it says Austin Klise, First Things Foundation.
It looks good. I think, do you have to write it the other way so it appears on camera the correct way? I think.
I gotta write backwards, don't I? Is that possible? Am I smart enough to do that? I don't think I can do it.
I couldn't do it. That's for sure.
Now, I have to point something out to our viewers, because I'm going to be pointing this out for a little bit as we do some more podcasts in our new studio. There is a glow light sign up. It's hard to see. We're working on that because we're getting a new camera. Like, this is a full installation. Austin, we're not playing around anymore.
It's the real deal.
The real deal. But if you notice, this actually comes from Sierra Leone, where you served. The light, it's hard to see, but when we get our camera, you'll be able to see it better. The light reads, the illumined neon light reads, Mr. Who You ? And this is from one of the buses. You know how they put at the top, like, a la Cabon, or like, God is with us and all that stuff?
Yeah.
This is one we saw in Sierra Leone, Mr. Who You ?
And you just bought it off the guy?
Well, I bought that neon sign because we're going to collect various cool sort of chicken bus type titles from around the world. And now that we're in Mozambique, and basically wherever you go in these countries called developing, as you know, Austin, you will see that the local transport drivers name their trucks all kinds of different things. And one truck from our past was called Mr. Who You ?
Yeah, that's there's so many crazy names out there. I couldn't even start, and how they're decorated with the big fuzzy dice and the whatever tennis rackets and all sorts of things. It's hard to describe, but maybe there'll be a thumbnail for this podcast that could show it.
It's the best. In Mali, I used to see all kinds of crazy ones too. Like Allah is watching. That was one.
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of them are like probably pretty heretical and just all over the place. Like God is money or something like
God is money. That's another one. That's another one. Here's one that we ordered in neon. It's on its way. Voice of Japan #4. That was on a truck. No one knows what it is. What I like is when they like the translations kind of messed up. And you're like, I think he's trying to say like, who are you to God, Mr. Who You? I just love this stuff. It's just
it is hilarious.
Language. Voice of Japan #4. That was also on a truck in West Africa.
A lot of good ones.
We're gonna collect them, various ones. If the audience has been to any wacky country, like on a chicken bus in Guatemala, you'll notice they also name their trucks. Send us in suggestions for really cool developing, I don't know, global South type transportation monikers. That's what we're going with. Austin, how's America since you've been back?
I think America's doing well. I haven't asked her lately, but no, the transition has been all over the place. But yeah, like you said, I kind of got that soft landing. So I came from Sierra Leone into Appalachia, then back to real life, quote.
That's true.
And so I feel very fortunate that I got that because otherwise it would have been a rough sort of transition back, I would say, but it wasn't.
Can I toast your arrival back with my?
What are you drinking? What do you got? What do you got there?
Well, I have a little powdery drink, a little health drink that I'm sipping on.
You always have something like
something weird. Something weird. Does not have steroids in it. It's just a little powdery drink.
It's just pure testosterone.
It's delicious. No, the toast is really not to your arrival back home. You've been home for a long time, but to serving successfully with us and then coming back home. What do you think the hardest, or what's the most difficult transitional thought you had and continue to have when you think about the cultures juxtaposed side by side, West African culture and culture of the West or America? What jumps out at you?
Yeah, I would say as a transitional thought, this isn't maybe the most just sort of stark thought I had when I went to Sierra Leone, because there's all the sort of thoughts that during that transition that are different. But coming back to America, dealing with this idea of discipline, what is discipline and what is work, was hard, because in Africa, work is perceived very differently than it is in America. And trying to understand what is on an abstract level actually good, and then how to manifest that in both places, because you kind of learn a particular way of being in Africa that's just different from a work perspective than it is in America, and then getting back here and like, oh, I now have to think differently about these things. So that was hard. Thinking through how to do work well back in America was really hard.
Well, how did work change in its nature in your mind when you came back? Was it that there was, I don't know, there was a lot of busy work going on, or work was less important, or what happened to your old concept of work?
I think so. I would say, at least in the villages of Sierra Leone, that it's still like a traditional economy. And what I mean by that is it's subsistence, like it's a subsistence living. And what you do is you work to the extent you need to work to support your family or whatever it is, like your occupation, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a palm wine guy, whatever you have. And then you come back and you do things around the house or whatever. But there's a lot of times just like doing community things, let's say like casual community things, where you're just like talking to people or cooking something that's not necessarily work as we would define it. Then when you get to America, the bifurcation between like the professional life and the personal life becomes a lot starker. And in some ways you try to maximize, or at least the culture seems to try to maximize the professional work you do, versus doing it on just a subsistence level, doing the minimum you need to do to kind of get by.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a different concept. And how do you deal with that when you get back is just kind of weird. Like it's like, what problems am I solving? What am I thinking about?
That's an interesting one. Yeah. What is this extra 2 hours doing to me, and for whom am I putting in the extra? In other words, extra becomes a thought, right? Excess.
I also think history, like in some ways, everything feels like it's progressing towards something in America. And now that's I think that's not true. It's not actually progressing towards something. So you feel like your work is culminating in some very, distant future point, whether it's like that promotion that gets talked about or whatever it is, or you're hitting this goal. Whereas in Africa, that just doesn't exist. Like, oh, you're a farmer. You're going to be a farmer doing the exact same thing essentially your whole life. There's no change.
Done.
Yeah. And in some ways that's really freeing. And it's just what you do. You just do the thing you do. It's not like you're thinking of some future date where it's going to change. And like, so there's no idea of progression. History is still. So
that's well said. That's well said. And so talk for a minute maybe about the philosophical notion of progress. It's something like a bottom to top, or a below to an above. And that linear, that type of concept, that was rooted out of me. Was it rooted out of you on some level? Like, are you progressing as a human, and like toward what end? Because it always ends in death. You're like, yes, I'm progressing toward my death. Like what?
Right. Yeah. It's something I'm still thinking through. So maybe some of my language is vague around it, but yeah, I would say at an abstract level, I think the notion is that, that you're progressing towards some goal, let's say in America and culturally just as a whole. Like we're progressing towards the next election where things are going to finally change, or the next one after that where they're going to finally change, or it's towards towards implementing this system, or towards implementing this sort of systemic change. These sort of words we hear a lot. And it's hard not to get swept up in that of like, oh, cool. Like if I just become part of this external progression, whatever that is, if it's systems, if it's philosophies, if it's political machinations, things will eventually change. If it's work, right? If it's the actual work you're doing, you're part of this external system of like changing, and you're going to like launch your company and it's going to be an IPO and there's going to be a lot of money or whatever, versus maybe the African notion where it's like you're changing. There's part of you that's changing, but nothing really externally ever kind of changes. It's kind of the same in some ways. Like don't worry about the external. And in some ways they're not that worried about the internal either, but I would say that's a lot more present than. So
external here is something like material. The material does not, the expectation is the material is not going to quote, get better or something. It's the material reality is more static.
I think the best example of this, and I just thought of it now, is when a lot of companies and nonprofits come into Africa, what do they try to change? They try to change the external, right? They build the bridge, they build the well, they build the whatever. Like if we change the external, things will be better. If we progress towards the external, we're going to get there, right? We're going to win, however you want to describe it. Versus the actual like Sierra Leonean mindset of like, no, actually that's not what's important. That doesn't matter. And so that manifests in people just seeming like they're lazy and don't care about those sort of things. Did you have that experience where it's like, people here are really lazy? At least when you first get there, you're
100%. Like, so Mali was like just lazy dudes for about 6 months. Because also you got to realize, because they're adhering to the vagaries of the natural world, the seeds had been planted. And so there wasn't much to do, like actually, at least for the men, because the work was always gender bifurcated. Like women were almost always in motion. They were
Right.
grinding and chopping and boiling, but when the farming was done for that moment, it was like done. Guys would sit around and chew on cocoa leaves and drink palm wine.
I remember when I first went to Kenya, the only time I went to Kenya, but I went there, and this was before Sierra Leone, and I was working on a banana farm. And I remember like thinking, having the notion of like, oh, these poor Africans, they have, they're working 13-hour days in the sun, farm. And it's like, we worked, like an hour in the morning and a couple hours in the evening when it wasn't super hot to like harvest these bananas. And then it was like, and then you're kind of just done. Right.
You got it.
Like you said, the work is done. The work is done. And so, relating that back to the US, the hard concept is like, it feels weird to just sit. Like that is not a normal, like, it's not a normal thing. Like, oh yeah, I'm just going to sit. Like, I'm not going to, the work is done. I'm just going to hang out. Like,
yeah. But this gets into, so there is, I think both of us would agree, there is such a thing as a Protestant work ethic, right? That's not a crazy concept. It's real.
No, I mean, it's absolutely a thing. I mean,
but let's do some history then, and let's do some theology then. Okay, it's a work ethic from protesters. So this is interesting. And you're a Catholic guy, right?
Right.
So the protesters came up with a work ethic. Now, I've always wondered, why is there work? And it's different than the Catholic work ethic. Let's just be honest. Catholics, especially Southern Mediterranean, like you're like, that dude's kind of lazy. Like, look at the Greeks. They couldn't keep up with the Germans, and basically like all hell broke loose. So what are the protesters, the Protestants working toward? This is always so interesting. Is it their salvation? Because it's kind of tied in.
It's tied into their salvation, but I think it'd be wrong to say they're working towards their salvation, because the Protestant notion of salvation is either you have it or you don't, at least in the Reformed world, right? So I think they're working as a sign of their salvation. So I like Max Weber's thesis when he says the Protestants are working as a sort of sign that they have been saved, right? Because the saving comes at some specific point, and then you need to know if that, like, you need to work out that salvation anxiety. Like, am I one of the elect or not? Because there's nothing I can do about it, but I want to know. Otherwise, it's just going to be a very excruciating life, not knowing if I'm among the fold. Yeah,
and Weber, he points out that it's not a conscious, I will do this, therefore I will show everyone I'm saved. It's not cynical like that. But there's something ingrained in the human psyche or the soul that wants to know how it all ends. That drives itself through, that concept drives through Islam. It's all the pagan world. How does this end? Do I end with being a rich king in Babylon? People want to know this stuff by nature. And so what would happen is people would subconsciously, that's a Freudian concept, but would in their spirit see someone gain something like wealth or prestige because they built a nicer fence. And it would sort of be in the water then that I needed a nicer fence. Not so much to prove that God is pleasing to me, but I would gain prestige that would, in the end, make me feel like I was an elect. And so there was this weird consciousness among Europeans, especially as they came to the United States. And I think that's fascinating. The problem, though, is then what do we do when we come back from Africa, when this starts to pop up around us and we start to recognize that maybe that ethic isn't what I want to participate in anymore? Do we become the lazy ones?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, it's like working when you come back to the United States, and when you think about the United States, like there's something that seems like it's inherently good about just like working and doing productive work. So work that's, earning an income or whatever it is. But I think what Africa taught me was that that's actually not the case, right? Like there's things that transcend that, and working to as this sort of external thing. Maybe that notion is upside down, but then how do you deal with that? How do you like actually live that way when you're back? It's a great question.
I don't know. Here's a challenge to you. Tell me what you think of this. What I learned and what you're describing, and my conclusion is that culture is so powerful that no one frees themselves from it. So, like the obese culture, I'm always like, I'm going to be in good shape. Well, there's a whole obesity factor to the West. Yeah. You cannot escape it on some level. You will be heavier. And hopefully you'll be heavier in a healthy way. But my point is you move toward that. That's why the West, that's why you can always, oh, there goes an American, at the Indonesian airport. Like there's something big about us because there's something big about our culture. We get shaped and made in the image of the culture. And I think that's the same with the work ethic. I don't know that I can live in Africa anymore. I'm torn. But the problem is it's like the Matrix. I took the pill. And I'm in the culture, but I'm aware, and it can be frustrating.
Yeah, there's like a sort of pain deep down inside because you would be completely out of place if you lived like a Sierra Leonean in America. Mm-hmm. And in some ways that maybe it wouldn't even be good as far as work goes, because it doesn't really make sense in our cultural context. Now, on the other side, how do we, like there's a glorification of productive work in the States, and it's really hard not to fall into it, and it's really hard to resist. But how, but maybe there is a need there to resist. So I've struggled with that. I don't come bearing an answer.
That's a good thing, I think.
I've only come bearing more problems.
I know, but your experience is helping me talk to people about our work, but also I think deep down there is an awakening. I think there's a waking up. I do think that this generation, and you're older, but I think 18 to 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds, they're smelling. See, I used to just be the old guy. And they don't work hard. And now I just know what's happening is there's a degree of wokeness that we should embrace, which is something like the culture can't go like this. It can't keep going like this. And the young people tell us that. Now, their answers to the problem would get weird, in my humble opinion. Like it's one thing to hear the prophet at 18 years old tell me their pain. It's another thing for them to then come up with the answer, and we all just bow down before an 18-year-old answer. Like, whoa, 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 whoa. But we should listen to their pain, no? I think we should.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of the zeitgeist of the culture is changing, and it kind of goes back to this question of history too. Of we're very much aware in the West of this idea of history and like the need to progress to something more and to change and do all these things, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the 18-year-olds and the 23-year-olds are on the precipice of like they sense that we're at the end of another age where things start needing to change again. And so like in our vocabulary, that's why we are kind of getting this vocabulary that's like around, around changing these systems and around changing these things. And because it's coming from some sort of angst within all of us in some way.
Well, you as a late 20s, right?
3-0.
3-0. Hey, you're a handsome 3-0. As a 3-0, we don't have to get in depth because I know you're in public, but you're getting married to a very lovely, I don't know, late 20s something. You guys are going to get settled down or whatever. Maybe likely have kids. Are you like my generation, 50 somethings? They're like, rah, rah, rah. But I think it goes all the way down into you guys, to the 30-year-olds. I think you're also a little nervous, right? You're probably nervous a little bit about what your kids, like what the new thing brings and how does it affect, the old things that you have in your soul. Do you get nervous, or are you not nervous because of your youth about what's coming?
I think in some ways I think in a very grand scheme, I'm not that nervous. Like in the end, like I think in the Christian mind, in the end, it's optimism, and a sort of hope. But absolutely on the immediate, 10-year plan, it's, things are chaotic in the West. It's just like, you have no idea the sort of things culturally your kids are going to be exposed to. And this is why the Benedict option and all these sort of troglodyte solutions to our problems are popular. And I get that. And so it's on one hand.
Do you embrace them?
Maybe like a hybrid version of that. Like Grace and I have talked a lot about homeschooling and what that could look like. And
are you weird for thinking of that in your? Is the 30-year-old age group? Are they thinking of homeschool? Because I know that was weird 15 years ago.
It was weird. I think it's becoming less weird. It's becoming more. I mean, it's all your culture. I mean, in some ways, we're surrounded by other people who do that, and so it's not that crazy.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think it happens at a cultural level. Like who are the people around you, and how weird do they think you are? But yeah, I still feel, especially coming back from Sierra Leone, like I still feel like an odd duck in the US. Cause we've talked about before, just with economic matters, maybe not with all theological matters, but with economic matters for sure. It's like you come back from FTF and you're like, wow, I really see the economy and how money should be handled. And
isn't that crazy?
Totally differently. Yeah. Totally differently. And so that even in some of these homeschooling circles, let's say, I feel like I'm still like an outlier in regards to some of my economic positions and things.
Let's talk about that real quick. Both of us had the same conversion of mindsets regarding economics. I just had mine in the 90s. You had yours in, I don't know, early 2020s. How would you characterize the way you see money and banking now after you've come home?
I think so. Again, tying this back to Sierra Leone, one thing that I found shocking was if a business does really well in Sierra Leone, like let's say you're selling cassava and you're like doing it really well, you're killing it.
The root is moving. You are moving root.
Right, you're moving the root, which traditionally you're not gonna, just in that economic system, you're not gonna have a monopoly. But let's say you get the monopoly, you're doing really well, blah blah blah. There's a good chance that you're not going to have much more wealth than the person right next to you, because you're giving it away to your family, to your friends, because everyone's seeing, oh, you have money, like you owe me that money. Like it's like a sort of obligation that you give it away, because it's like, oh, you have that, like you have food today, like, oh, that means you have to give me some. And it's like it almost feels like people take it for granted. Oh, like you have that, you should give it to me. And so the top wild. At least the community level, at the top 10% are really close to the bottom 10%, because there's this sort of communitarian distribution of wealth, right? That happens not from the government, that happens not from any sort of political system. It just happens at the family level, right? Like you just give it away. And I thought that was crazy. I was like, this doesn't make sense, because you should save that money. And this is right out of the Spirit of Protestant Ethic by Weber. But I was like, you should save that money and then reinvest it in your business. And like, then you'll reinvest in your business will grow and you'll get more money. And then you just reinvest that money and you just keep doing this thing. Right. And so the shift in my mindset came from, does excess go towards a reinvestment for more, so you can create more excess? Or does it go towards like the common good, the immediate good of the people around you? So like, how do you use your wealth for the people right here and now, instead of like this sort of, I always need to save it and invest, and it's like always doing things for me. I would say that changed primarily. And
then, because you're a commie, you're such a commie.
No,
see, that's the narrative though, right? Now you go, wait a minute, what happened to Austin? You sounded like maybe you want to take something that's not yours, or like you support welfare or something, right? Can you feel you fall into that narrative? Now you've become politicized if you bring that message back here, right?
Totally. Yeah. And if anyone knew me before, like they would laugh at that, because like
I'm one of the people who knew you before, and I do laugh,
yeah,
but I knew what was happening.
So no, I mean, communism is like social distribution of wealth at an economic or a political level is completely different. And it doesn't work because it lacks love. It lacks the idea of, it's not about the end of people getting the wealth. It's not really about you getting the 10% you're owed from your friend. You are owed that in some way, but it's more about them through their love giving it to you, which could never happen at a political scale, right? It's not like the government's going to come in and love and take what's not theirs and give to, those who need it. It's more about the local community members through sort of a love or at least a duty wanting to give this away because their friends and family don't have. So forcing people to give it away doesn't work. Like, I would rather have capitalism in some way, because I don't want to, because then it's taking away the love. Like, there's no love in forcing people to give it away, right? So I don't think it falls into either of those neat camps. This sort of idea of the common good.
And I think I was up in Steubenville bringing in one of our new field workers, a guy named Jacob, and I bumped into a whole bunch of new polity people. And what I learned is that what's happening in, I would say, okay, let's do it. I think in libertarian circles, in Orthodox Christian circles, I saw Catholics doing what I thought was happening in those circles exactly the same way, which is they're not reimagining, they're returning and remembering what has always been. And I think that's the answer of what the economy will look like, but not before a war. There's going to be a war because there's too many people invested in what has been. That's where I'm going with that. What do you think about that?
I like the Solzhenitsyn thesis that it just takes one of us to do it. And like, the evils of our current system can be usurped through individual people or individual families, let's say, doing good things and changing their hearts. So like, you see the local cheese shop in your town, and now you're like, oh, I want to invest in that instead of Amazon stock. Oh, cool. Like, I want to give to the cheese shop owner because like they're doing something good for the community. And you're going to make less money or maybe no money or whatever.
Well, no, go back. It is less money.
It is.
I don't think the way reality is structured, it will be no money. Like, I think that reality is structured in a way, and this, of course, is a very ancient Christic understanding, is that there's just excess. I mean, you just throw seeds on the ground, and we saw it in Africa. They're going to grow. Something's going to grow. And so, but it's less. You know what I mean? If you tend it a lot, and you get big farm implements and the biggest combines, you can just go crazy and you can build a massive farm. I get it. But if you just let it grow, it'll grow. And I don't think we're in that space. But I like what you said. You'll have less money. Now, can we do that in America? Can we be less people money and still be Americans?
I think there's hope. I mean,
less money.
Yeah, I think it's hard, obviously. Yeah, it's tough on some level, but you do see like the minimalist movement happening, and I don't know, some things that kind of give you hope, but I don't think you can do it without Christianity. So I think that would have to happen first, because it doesn't make sense.
Austin, let me just take a break for 1 second and we'll be right back. Andrew, swipe it. Hey everybody, it's spring, it's baseball season. You know what else it is? It's time to recruit for the Georgian Republic. I want to quickly mention that we are recruiting for a new field worker in the Georgian Republic for this current rotation. Here's a quick look at what it means to be a field worker. Links in the description. Check it out. Maybe it's time to start realizing that all true creation starts from sacrifice. It's time to stop consuming. It's time to start creating. You're here for a reason. Perhaps it's time to discover what that reason is. Go away. Deeply immerse. take 2 years. Find yourself serving others. Become a field worker at First Things Foundation. So money's a tough one, right? Because it sort of is wound up in our identity. Language is another tough one because, we battle in America over language, and people should speak English in America. And then that goes back to are we English? What is English to me? And I learned a ton about language in First Things and Peace Corps and IOCC in Georgia. What did you learn about language? Isn't it something? It's a wacky thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is something. I think a good example is in Mende. I believe the word for welcome is give chicken, and which is informative because it's like what you're supposed to do when you're welcoming a guest is you give them a chicken or a goat. I know Daniel kind of collected a number of just like different animals and all the different places he went, because people would just be like, oh yeah, like here you go, here's a chicken, welcome. That's kind of how you think about it. I think the other thing that's interesting is there's no word, I believe, in Mende for wife, or there wasn't, because that wasn't a concept, because it comes from like a polygamous tribal religion. And so, this is informative. Like I know something about these people because there's no word for wife. It's not a Christian context primarily that they're coming for, when there was just a one man and one woman bond of marriage, right? So I think there's some on the nose ones like that definitely help inform.
I loved playing with Bambara and Malinke and French and then English, and you started to see like you can't fully immerse in another person's life until you speak that language. And by the way, this goes for my marriage. We both speak English supposedly, but there's a language to my wife's body, how she moves. There's a language to how she processes the morning versus the day, and all that stuff has become my language. But it both informs me, but I'm also informed by it. Like there's this weird communal relationship between the words, right? When you're immersing, which is, as I learn more, I'm changed more and become more like the language I'm learning. And I think this is why people, rightly so, should say that identity is in language.
Yeah. And I think language is symbolic. Like every word we have is a symbol for something, right? And so the symbols we surround ourselves with are going to inform who we are, because just like earlier in the conversation, culture does really matter. And so the symbols we use or don't use really matter. This is why, like, if you're watching a lot of weird things, or if you're listening to a lot of weird things, or if you're surrounding yourself by people who are saying weird things, the language that they're using over time is going to shape your reality that's different. It's like a different reality because the symbolism is getting changed primarily through the use of language.
And the cynic in me says, what you said is super true. And that people with super reach or power also believe it's super true. And what they actually set out to do is provide a language that shapes me and you into something like what they need. And maybe I'm describing politics in that media in this country, and this is what you realize about West Africa, especially for me. I think for you, it might have been a little different because of the way media invaded West Africa since I left it full time in the 90s. But for me, a day in West Africa was literally quiet, in the sense you might catch a radio, but somebody would have to have battery. There was no electricity, so the batteries were really expensive, and so you would only really listen at night. During the day, all you heard was farm implements and people talking. There was no media in that sense. And so that language, the media's language, it wasn't infiltrating the souls of West African farmers or American farmers, in the 1920s. And so what language was allowed to grow within that? And that was something like the language of the family, or the church.
Yeah. Versus the language now of the NGO, let's say.
Right.
You see this all over West Africa, just the sort of languages that NGOs implement through like sometimes very formal vocabulary lists that they propagate, informs how the locals.
Wait, explain that, because that's super. So the nonprofits, the non-government organizations they inculcate, right? Like, what do you mean? Like they teach a script?
Pretty much. I mean, like, if you want funding for whatever your project is, for example, I forget the exact wordage of it now, but it's something like women's causes or something like this is one of the key sort of categories of NGO development, is like women's enablement or something like this, like enabling women to do just something vaguely, right? In general, it doesn't really have to be anything. And it doesn't really mean anything, because it could be like, you could want money for a palm wine processing plant, and you could just simply say that this is going to enable women in some way, and then you'll get that money because you put those words.
Wow. And this is local Mende or Temne people, local Sierra Leoneans. They're sort of downloading this verbiage from nonprofit teachers and then repeating it to outsiders.
Totally. Yeah. They would talk to me about it, of like when we were working together on grants, they would say something like, oh, well, this is going to enable women. And I'll be like, oh, interesting. How? And like, it wouldn't usually go beyond that. Like they wouldn't actually have, like, there wasn't like a long-term plan of like how we're going to, incorporate 4 women into the processing of whatever. It was more just, they knew they had to stick that on their proposal in order to get funds. They had to say, this is going to benefit girls and women, and beyond that, it didn't really matter. But they would then repeat that. It's like, oh, we want to do this thing that enables women. Like, what do you want to do? We want to start honey. And it's like, oh, those things seem to not correlate at all.
Can I tell a quick story? In Mozambique, and setting up our site assessment, and we've just landed 2 First Things guys in northern Mozambique. Well, not so northern, mid-central Nampula. But check this out. When Josh and I arrived, we were introduced and brought to the mayor of this little town, Karane. And speaking of language, just like you just described, when he met me, he started a script. It was very odd. And I could tell. Now, he was an English speaker, but, they speak Portuguese and Makua. But in his English, now that you say it, it was like a script. And you know what it was about? It was about the vaccines.
Right.
This was in 2021, early, or maybe, it might have been 21, middle of 21. And he spoke to me about vaccines, assuming things about what I wanted to hear. And it was a script. And when I asked him how many people have COVID here, he literally said, oh, I don't know. I don't think anybody has COVID.
Right.
And then there was this disconnect. I'm like, oh, because he had just given me the script. And what was the script? If people are interested, this was the script. Hi, nice to meet you. It's so good that you've come. We're so excited about the holiday that we've created. The holiday will allow all of our farmers to come in and receive the vaccine for COVID. And I was like, oh, and that the COVID vaccines will arrive and we will throw a holiday, and the holiday will allow the farmers to receive the vaccine. And I was like, okay, but like, how many people have COVID? And he was like, well, I don't think anybody has COVID. He actually told me later, he said, that's a white man's disease. That's fact.
Did he say that? Yeah.
He actually said that.
Yeah. I think I actually heard that in Sierra Leone when it was first breaking out.
Yeah. Cause you were there.
Yeah. Exactly. Those are the exact sort of things where language has come in and it's sort of getting regurgitated on a local level, not quite penetrating the soul yet. Like it's like you can tell it hasn't penetrated deep down, because like the chief was saying, he doesn't really he just knows he has to say it to probably get funds or get people to come, but he doesn't really get it. So in some ways that's good. But it is fascinating.
But that's a great point you're making. In some ways it's good. In other words, in some ways it's, you know what it's like? It's like a pitch. Like if I know some Chinese billionaire standing there, I'm going to talk to him a certain way.
Right.
But I really don't believe it.
That's exact, and that's maybe the heart of why it's weird, is because we don't actually believe what we're saying, and whether these NGOs actually believe what they're saying when they're kind of trying to propagate this sort of, preferred speech about, how you need to, include women and girls on all these proposals that have nothing to do with women and girls, nor should they. It's kind of a lie, I would think, is maybe the thing that's weird about it, is it's ultimately a lie. And
man, you want to hear my really cynical self? This is my really cynical self. Deep down, I actually think that none of those issues are particularly salient for the big nonprofits, nor are they salient or interesting to the West Africans and East Africans who are adopting them. I actually think this is a movement by smart people, elites around the world, to create consumers and to create, the female to the male. So you got to plug in, right? You need the right plug in. And when we get the right plug in, then we can send the electricity to the right places. That's my super cynical self. I think most people would agree that's not that cynical. That's sort of the history of colonialism. But when you experience in Africa like we did, it's a really sad thing.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is sad. And it goes back to our first conversation, ultimately, of like work and, consumerism and just kind of how we see all these things. Because I think in the Western mind, it doesn't make sense why people aren't working or developing in a particular Western way. And so first, maybe pushing the language, which then allows the sort of foundation for Western methods, maybe the Protestant method of working in a particular way in a capitalist society, is like the goal, whether it's conscious or not. I haven't thought too much about that, like at a macro level, but it's an interesting thought, and it seems to check out.
All right, listen, will you come back? I'd love to have you back with some other of our field workers who have also returned home. You're sort of the leader of that group on some level. Plus, you invited me to your wedding, so we're going. Helen keeps pointing to it on the refrigerator.
Nice. So, I'm excited to have you guys.
Yeah, we love you, man. So there's more to say. We can't say it right now. Maybe, I don't know, give us one more word. America and your return and first things. You recommend such a thing, such an endeavor to go for 2 years? It's a long time. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's for everybody. I will say, in full transparency, I don't think first things is like what everyone ought to do. But I think it's great for the right people. If you're the kind of person who, I think Daniel said this once, you kind of are wrestling with why there is so much suffering when there seems like there shouldn't be, and yet it still exists, and kind of how to reconcile that. I think First Things provides a context and a lens to struggle against that and to understand what that means, to kind of search for the underlying currents of why we do what we do by going somewhere that's totally foreign, and seeing yourself maybe for the first time outside of yourself, in a place where you have none of the sort of support structure that you're used to. So for that, I am just incredibly grateful, and I think it could be a great experience for so many people.
Austin Klise. All right, we'll talk to you up there, Massachusetts. Thanks for coming on, brother. And we'll talk to you again soon. Much love.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll get back to you. Well, thanks a lot, Austin Klise, for coming on. Austin, man, you see how he has wisdom beyond his age? That I even just said that tells you how old I am. Because he's not that young. At 30, like at 30, at 30, people had like 12 kids already because they got married at 12, back in the old world. Like, come on, Austin. Who loves you? First Things Foundation loves you. www.first-things.org. Please consider this. Consider coming to our fundraiser on May 6th. Spend a weekend in Greenville. Come listen to some live music, some good live music. I'll tell you the band as soon as I lock it down. May 6th, a giant capey, lots of giveaways, great donations to be had, and a ton of good live music. First Things Foundation concert May 6th. Lots of stuff popping. Check out our merch store. Definitely go become a recurring donor and join our Substack online class once a month, our Q&A session. I'd love for you guys to go check out the Substack. All right, that's Heavy Things Lightly. I love you. God bless. Take care. Peace out.